Soviet State Committee for Defense appointed 3 commanders to lead the Russian armies against Hitler. Marshal Voroshilov for the northwestern sector, the defense of Leningrad, and for the western sector, what the communiques call the center sector, Marshal Timoshenko, who succeeded Marshal Voroshilov as Commissar for Defense. He fights for the safety of Moscow. In the southwest, Marshal Budyonny, whose task is to defend the Ukraine and stop the drive to the Caucasus. On the whole length of the gigantic 1,800-mile front, the Red Army went into action against Nazi aggression. These are actual scenes from the front. Not with any spectacular clash of huge forces concentrated for world-shaking battles, but by units working to a defensive strategy carefully predetermined by Stalin and his marshals. The Soviet Ministry of Information at once assumed its rightful place in the war effort, leaflet raids over the enemy lines being only one method of undeceiving the Germans. For her own troops, the Soviet ensured that the truth of all that was happening should be made known. Hence the field printing presses. Official news, the best antidote to rumor. The Russians realized this was a total war right from the start. The strengthening of defense works, the construction of additional fortifications, was at once regarded as the task of everyone available to work upon them. In such a vast country, lines of resistance can be organized far from the front. And you don't need a uniform or a permit to make tank traps. The industrial power of the Soviet was harnessed to the urgent needs of the moment, with the production of coal as its basis. The Soviet is the 4th biggest producer of coal in the world, and she needs to be. On the home front, there were many scenes that may remind us here in Britain of earlier days in this fight against Hitlerism. Blood transfusion, for instance, on behalf of wounded soldiers and in readiness for ruthless raids. Raids that have already begun. And recruits, there was a universal call-up to provide almost unlimited expansion of the great Red Army. In manpower, the Soviet has proved second to none in the world, whether in numbers or quality. Not all the men who fight for the preservation of the Soviet are regular members of the Red Army. In Russia, too, they have their Home Guard organizations. Groups of men, some of them mounted and all specially trained to deal with enemy parachutists. This is the Home Guard of a collective farm. In addition, there are the guerrilla fighters, the men who are harassing the Nazis without respite by day and night in the enemy's rear. Arms for all, weapons for every man who can help in the defense of Russia. As for the Red Air Force, they've been fighting like heroes, fighting the Battle of Russia. Here are some being decorated with the Order of the Red Flag, men who have already proved themselves aces, men who carry on, although wounded, men with but one thought, the complete annihilation of the enemy. Landing after completing their task, pilots have welcome stories to tell of the destruction of Nazi planes. Here's the evidence. Planes that have paid the penalty, and Nazi airmen who have met their doom fighting in a shameful cause. Villagers right up near the fighting come and have a squint at the broken enemy machines. It's a real pleasure for them. Same here. None of us ever thought the Luftwaffe was invincible, but all the same, it's nice to be proved correct. Prisoners. Nazi prisoners, men of the not-so-invincible Luftwaffe looking extremely sorry for themselves. The Russians say that many of the Nazis are far younger than any of their own airmen. Maybe that's a sign of the times. They all look pretty doleful. Most of them had apparently been fed on terrible atrocity stories of what would happen to them if captured. Now they're beginning to learn the truth, which must eventually spread to Germany. The cheerful-looking ones are Austrians. It seems that they were glad to be rid of the Nazis. Meanwhile, Russian pilots bomb up their machines for the counterattack, to give Germany a bellyful of the misery she has handed out. As Mr. Attlee has said, no convention for us against the bombing of cities. The fighter escort takes off. Some of the Soviet fighters, you'll notice, are extremely like our Spitfires and Hurricanes. And the signal for the bombers' takeoff is given. While in the west, the Royal Air Force day and night offensive grows more and more powerful, the Red Air Force hits back at the invader in the east.